The phone rang at 4:51 in the morning and Renata Hayes was already awake. She had been awake for an hour, sitting at the small kitchen table in her apartment, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold. The city outside was still dark. A dog somewhere below her window was barking at nothing. She let it ring twice, which was all she allowed herself, and then she picked up. "You start Monday," the voice on the other end said. No hello, no name. That was how it always went. "Understood," she said. "Third floor. General ward. Your cover paperwork is already in the system. Darlene Pratt is the head nurse. She's good. Don't underestimate her." Renata set the cold mug down. Duration? Open. Until it's done. The call ended. She sat there another minute, listening to the dog bark, and then she got up and poured the cold coffee down the sink and started packing. She had done this before. Different buildings, different uniforms, different names she answered to in hallways. But the mechanics were always the same. You arrived somewhere as someone small. You stayed small. And while everyone around you saw nothing but small, you watched everything. St. Aurelius Regional Medical Center was a mid-sized hospital in a mid-sized city that nobody had strong feelings about. It had 4 floors, a parking structure that was always full by 8 in the morning, a cafeteria that served passable soup on Wednesdays, and roughly 300 staff members who had long since stopped really seeing one another. It was exactly the kind of place where a person could disappear in plain sight. Renata showed up on Monday at 6:43 in the morning in blue scrubs, a hospital-issued badge clipped to her pocket, and a travel mug of actual good coffee, because she had decided that was the one thing she was not willing to sacrifice. She found the locker room, found her locker, found the medication cart she had been assigned, and got to work. The 3rd floor smelled like antiseptic and old carpet, and something beneath both of those that was harder to name. She had noticed over the years that every institution had a smell that was really just the smell of people living under pressure for too long. Hospitals had it worse than most. The pressure here was constant. Life and loss traded places in these hallways so regularly that the staff had learned, out of self-preservation, to keep moving. She learned to keep moving with them. Darlene Pratt found her inside of 20 minutes. She was a broad-shouldered woman in her late 50s, with reading glasses perched on her head, and the kind of calm that only comes from having genuinely seen everything. She walked the floor like she owned it, which in every practical sense she did. She stopped at Renata's cart, looked her over once with the efficiency of someone who could assess a situation the way others read headlines, and extended her hand. "Ren," Darlene said, reading the badge. "I go by Darlene, not Nurse Pratt, not ma'am. Darlene." She paused. "You've worked a floor before. I can tell by how you stand at the cart." "A few years back," Renata said. "I took some time away." Darlene nodded once. She did not ask what the time away had been for. That, Renata would come to understand, was one of Darlene's great strengths. She understood that people came to hospitals carrying things they hadn't named yet, and she did not require the naming. "Rounds start in 10 minutes, Darlene said. "Stay close today. Ask if you don't know. Don't guess on medication. Anything else I need to know about you?" Renata considered the question in the half-second she had to consider it. "I'm good with difficult patients," she said, "and I don't rattle easily." Something moved behind Darlene's eyes. A small calculation. Then she nodded again and walked away. That was day 1. The days that followed were long and physical and relentless in the way only floor nursing can be. Renata changed dressings and updated charts, and explained the same medication schedules to the same patients 3 times in one morning, because fear makes people forget things they already know. She learned the rhythms of the ward the way she had once learned the rhythms of places far less ordinary than this. She learned which patients rang the call bell for company, and which ones rang it because they were genuinely scared. She learned which of her colleagues cut corners, and which ones would work an extra hour without complaining. She learned the layout of every supply closet, every stairwell, every room that had a sight line to something worth watching. Room 311 was worth watching. The man in room 311 had been admitted 3 weeks before Renata arrived. His name in the system was Gerald Mott, 61 years old. A gallbladder procedure that had gone smoothly, and then, inexplicably, stretched into an extended recovery that nobody on the floor had questioned, because extended recoveries happened all the time. His chart was unremarkable. His demeanor was pleasant. He tipped the orderlies in small folded bills and asked thoughtful questions about the nurses' weekends. He was not named Gerald Mott. Renata knew this because she had been briefed. She also knew it from watching him. There was a specific kind of alertness that people carried when they had spent years in rooms where the exits mattered. Most people in a hospital bed go soft with vulnerability. Gerald Mott did not go soft. He was relaxed on the surface, the way a person is relaxed when they are working very hard at it. She did not look at him differently than she looked at any other patient. That was essential. She brought his medications, checked his vitals, asked him the standard questions. He answered them pleasantly. She noted everything. She also noted Dr. Philip Fielding. Dr. Fielding was the head of cardiology. He was 52, well regarded, and had no medical reason to be on the third floor as often as he was. Cardiology was on the second floor. He drifted up to 3 with the practiced nonchalance of someone who had convinced himself he was casual. He would pause near the nursing station, make brief conversation, pick up a chart he had no business picking up and set it back down. He was never near room 311 directly. He was always near enough. Renata filed it. She reported it through channels that did not appear on any hospital communication system. She used the burner phone that lived in the bottom of her locker under a spare pair of shoes. She wrote no names, used no room numbers. The people on the other end knew what to do with the information. Then she went back to the floor. There was a woman on the third floor during her 4th week named Eleanor, 83 years old, liver failure, hair that had once been red and was now the pale color of old roses. Her family was 3 states away. Her daughter had called twice, and both times the call had ended with silence that was worse than arguing. Eleanor watched the door of her room the way people watch for something they are not sure is still coming. On a Thursday afternoon, when the floor was quieter than usual and Renata had a few minutes between rounds, Eleanor reached out and took her hand. "Carol," she said softly. "You came." Renata was not Carol. She knew that. Eleanor knew it too, somewhere beneath the fog of illness and medication. But the knowing had gotten too heavy to carry, and she had set it down. Renata did not correct her. She sat. She held Eleanor's hand. She stayed until Eleanor's eyes closed. She did not write that in her report. Some things happened in hospitals that belonged only to the hospitals. They did not translate into intelligence language. They did not need to. She went back to the medication cart. She refilled the IV bags. She noted that Gerald Mott had requested 3 additional visitors that week, when previously he had requested none. She reported it. She drank her good coffee standing in the hallway at the end of a 12-hour shift and looked at the lights of the city coming on through the window at the end of the corridor. She had been on this floor for 5 weeks. She could feel the operation beginning to tighten around her, the way a sky changes before weather arrives. She could not have explained to anyone outside of her actual life what that feeling was like, but she recognized it the way you recognize the beginning of something you have been waiting for. She clocked out at 7:12 p.m. She drove home. She made dinner. She ate it standing at the kitchen counter. She set her alarm for 5:30. She was back on the floor at 6:47. The hospital thought she was just a nurse. That was exactly what she needed. She had 14 years of experience in naval intelligence, 3 overseas deployments that did not appear on any resume she had ever submitted anywhere, and a commendation that had been delivered to an address she no longer lived at. She had run cover identities in places where the cost of a wrong step was not a reprimand. She had learned to exist inside institutions as the person everyone overlooked, not because she was forgettable, but because she was precise about what she chose to make memorable. The blue scrubs were the same as everyone else's. The badge said her name correctly, at least the one she was using. The coffee was hers and hers alone. Everything else was the work. And the work, for now, was learning this floor the way she had learned every floor before it. Every crack in the system, every gap in the schedule, every person who noticed more than they let on, and every person who noticed less than they should. Darlene Pratt noticed more than almost anyone Renata had ever worked beside. That was a problem she filed away and kept watching. She updated a chart. She helped a man named Oliver Crane, 64 and recovering from a hip replacement, figure out the television remote, which was genuinely complicated. She brought fresh water to the woman in 308, who refused to drink the water from the tap and would only accept bottled, which was not hospital policy. But Renata had decided some fights were not worth having. She moved through the floor like someone who had always been there. She moved through the floor like someone who had never been anywhere else. The operation was not done, but it was moving, and she was ready. Gerald Mott started sleeping differently. Renata noticed it on a Tuesday, 11 days into her second month on the floor. She noticed it because she noticed everything, and because a change in sleep pattern in a man like Gerald Mott was not a neutral fact. Up until that week, he had slept in the early afternoon, 2 to 4, reliable as a schedule. Nurses on the floor had noted it in the casual way that floor staff note patient habits. His light was always off by 2. The call bell never rang between 2 and 4. Easy window for a medication check, they said. Go then. That Tuesday, his light was on at 2:30. Renata went by on a routine check. Gerald Mott was not asleep. He was sitting up, looking at the wall across from his bed with the focused, inward expression of a man working through a problem in his head. He looked up when she came in. The pleasant smile arrived immediately, the one that was slightly too assembled. "Everything all right, Mr. Mott?" she asked. "Couldn't sleep," he said. "Getting restless, I think. You know how it is. I can ask the doctor about something to help with that." No, nothing like that." He shook his head, still smiling. "I'm fine, just restless." She checked his vitals. Everything was normal. She updated his chart. She left. In the hallway, she kept her pace even. She went to the supply closet at the end of the corridor, counted out a quantity of gauze that she did not need, wrote it down, and used those 90 seconds to think. Restlessness in a man who had been entirely controlled for 6 weeks meant something had changed. Either his situation outside the hospital had shifted, or someone had communicated something to him, or he was anticipating a development he had not told his doctors about. Any of these possibilities narrowed the window she was working in. She reported it that evening. The response came back within 2 hours. "Accelerate the timeline. You have 10 days. She read it, deleted it, and put the phone back under the shoes. The next morning she came in at 6:47, clocked in, poured a cup of the vending machine coffee because she had forgotten her travel mug for the first time in 6 weeks, and stood at the nursing station drinking something that tasted like warm cardboard and thinking about her 10 days. Darlene appeared beside her as if from nowhere, which was a habit of Darlene's that never stopped being slightly startling. "You forgot your real coffee," Darlene observed. "I did." "You must be distracted." Darlene said it flatly, as a fact, not a question. She picked up a clipboard and began reviewing it. "Anything I should know about on my floor?" The question was routine. Darlene asked it every morning. She meant, did anything happen on the night shift that the night staff failed to document properly? Are there patients I need to prioritize? Is there a problem forming somewhere that I should walk toward before it becomes a crisis? She did not mean, is there a covert operation running out of room 311 that you have been managing for 7 weeks? "Mr. Mott in 311 had a restless night," Renata said. "Sleep pattern changed. Might be worth flagging for the attending." Darlene wrote something on the clipboard. Noted. That was the full exchange. Renata went to her cart and started the morning rounds. She moved through the floor with the efficiency she had built over weeks of learning it. She knew which rooms needed her first. She knew which patients would be awake and which would still be sleeping. She knew the orderly on morning shift, a young man named Juno, would have the supply cart half-stocked because he always did, and she would have to finish it herself. And she did not resent this because Juno was 22 and working double shifts to send money home, and he was doing the best he could with what he had. She stocked the cart. She did the rounds. She documented everything with the precision of someone who understood that documentation was the difference between a defensible record and a liability. And she watched. She watched the nurse's station when she was away from it, and she watched the corridor outside room 311 when she was near it, and she watched Dr. Philip Fielding when he drifted onto the 3rd floor on his 3rd visit of the week, with nothing in his hands, and no apparent destination. This time, Fielding stopped at the nurse's station. He asked Lena, the day shift charge nurse, a question about a patient in 307, whose chart he had technically been CC'd on for a specialist consultation 2 weeks earlier. The question was thin. The reason to be there was thinner, but it was technically legitimate, which was the thing about Dr. Fielding. Everything he did was technically legitimate if you only looked at the individual action. The pattern was what wasn't. Renata watched him from the supply alcove. She watched the way his eyes moved while Lena answered his question. He was not watching Lena. He was watching the corridor. Specifically, he was watching the door of room 311. A visitor went in at 11:15. This was the second visitor that week, where previously there had been none for nearly a month. The visitor was a man in his mid-40s, business casual, a get-well card visible in his hand. He stayed 18 minutes. When he came out, his expression was pleasant and unrevealing and entirely constructed. Renata had committed his face to memory before he reached the elevator. She reported it that afternoon. The response: "We know him. This changes the timeline. You have 5 days. 5 days." She sat in her car in the parking structure for 3 minutes after reading it. The structure was dim and smelled like exhaust and the distant echo of someone's radio 2 levels up. She thought about what 5 days meant in terms of what still needed to happen. She thought about the gaps and whether they were closable. She thought about Fielding and the visitor and the new sleep pattern and what the combination of those 3 things told her about the state of the things she had been managing for nearly 2 months. Then she got out of her car and went back inside. She had a medication cart to finish and 2 patients due for wound checks, and a charge sheet to complete before the end of shift. She did all of it. She did it well. She did not let the 5 days show on her face or in her pace, or in the way she answered when Oliver Crane in 309 called her back to ask her one more time how to add a channel on the television. She sat on the edge of his bed and showed him again. "You're very patient," he told her. "It's a good remote," she said. "It's genuinely confusing." He laughed. She left. She clocked out at 7 and drove home, and made dinner, and ate it standing at the counter, and thought about nothing she was allowed to think about in a room with windows. 2 days later, the thing with Fielding broke open. It did not break open dramatically. That was almost never how these things went. It broke open quietly, the way most serious things do, with a piece of information arriving that recontextualized everything before it. Renata was at the nurse's station at 8:40 in the morning when Lena mentioned, in the entirely casual tone of someone sharing ordinary floor gossip, that Dr. Fielding had called in that morning to say he would be out for a few days. Personal matter. His cases had been redistributed. Renata noted it without noting it. She confirmed 2 medication orders. She initialed a chart. She went to the supply closet and stood in the small, bright room among the orderly rows of bandages and gloves and IV bags, and let the information settle into place. Fielding had pulled back. That meant one of 2 things. Either he knew something was closing in, or he had already done what he needed to do, and had no further reason to be visible. Both possibilities meant the same thing in practical terms. She sent a message. 1 line. "Fielding is out, not illness. Confirmed status of operation." The response came 40 minutes later, while she was changing a dressing in room 306. "Stand by. Do not alter routine. They are moving." She replaced the last piece of medical tape. She smoothed it down carefully. She told the patient in 306, a quiet woman named Carol who was recovering from a procedure and reading the same novel she had been reading for 3 weeks, that she would be back in an hour to check on her. Carol nodded without looking up from her book. Renata went back to the corridor. She had 3 days left on the original timeline, and she was no longer sure the timeline was going to hold. Things in motion did not always hold to the structure built around them. She had learned this the way she had learned most things in her career, which was by watching what happened when they did not. She went back to her cart. She updated 4 charts. She checked on Gerald Mott at 11, who was sitting up again, pleasant smile assembled, telling her he had finally slept better last night. "That's good," she said. "Maybe I was just worried about nothing," he said. "That happens," she said. She looked at him for exactly as long as a nurse would look at a patient she was reassuring. She adjusted the edge of his blanket where it had slipped, though it did not need adjusting. She said she would be back at 2. She left. In the hallway outside his door, she stood for one breath, just one, and then she moved. The floor was busy. A new admission had come in on the far end, and Juno was helping wheel someone to imaging, and Lena was on the phone at the nurse's station with the expression she wore when she was managing something that was taking longer than it should. Renata moved through all of it. She was 3 days from something she had been building toward for 2 months. She could not feel that. Not here. Not on this floor. Not in these scrubs. The work required that she be only what she appeared to be. She refilled the IV bags. She brought fresh water to the woman in 308, who would only drink bottled. She ate lunch in the cafeteria in 14 minutes, and came back upstairs with a cup of soup in a paper cup that was better than nothing, and approximately worse than everything else. She sat at the nurse's station and wrote her afternoon notes and listened to the floor breathe around her. 2 days, she thought. Then she stopped thinking it and finished the notes. She was a nurse on a Wednesday afternoon on the 3rd floor of a mid-sized hospital in a mid-sized city. She was exactly what she looked like, and she was exactly what nobody in this building understood her to be. Both of these things were true at the same time, and she had long since made her peace with that particular condition. She capped her pen. She went back to work. They came in on a Wednesday. Renata was at the medication cart when she heard the shift in the air at the nurse's station. It was not a sound exactly, more the absence of the usual sounds, the particular quality of people going quiet in a way that was not their choice. She had been trained to hear that kind of quiet, and she heard it now, and she kept her eyes on the chart she was updating and kept her pen moving across the page. The elevator opened at the far end of the corridor. 2 men walked out. She knew from the way they walked before she could see their faces. It was a particular kind of walk, purposeful without hurry, taking in the space with the quick, cataloging efficiency of people whose job required them to understand a room within seconds of entering it. They were in suits that had not been chosen for comfort. Their shoes were the wrong shoes for a hospital floor. Good leather that had no business on linoleum, and they both knew it, and neither of them adjusted. They went to the nurse's station. Becca was at the desk. Becca was 24, and always had a wireless earbud in one ear and the other ear available for the world, and she looked up at the 2 men with the pleasant, practiced expression she used for everyone who approached the desk with an agenda she had not been briefed on. The taller of the 2 men spoke first. He spoke quietly enough that Renata, 20 feet away with her head down and her pen moving, caught only the cadence and not the words. But she heard her name, not the name on the badge. The other one. She heard Becca say, slowly, "I'm sorry, we don't have a... Let me check. We have a Nurse Hayes on this floor?" She heard the answer. "That's her." Renata finished the line she was writing. She capped the pen. She set the chart down on the cart in the correct position and turned around. The 2 agents were already walking toward her. The floor around them had gone very still. Lena, at the other end of the station, had stopped pretending to look at something else. Juno, returning from imaging with an empty wheelchair, had stopped pushing it. Even the background noise of the floor, the hum and beep and low conversation that was always present, had dimmed. Renata looked at the 2 men. Something happened in her face that was not a change so much as a clarification, like a radio signal that had been slightly off frequency suddenly finding its channel. The posture did not shift dramatically. The expression did not break open into something readable. But the thing she had been holding quietly behind the nurse, behind the scrubs and the badge and the medication cart, surfaced now, and it was unmistakably something different from what the 3rd floor had been looking at for the past 2 months. The taller agent stopped in front of her. He reached into his jacket and produced his credentials with the unhurried movement of someone who did this often enough that it had lost its drama. "Captain Hayes," he said. "Not a question." "Gentlemen," she said. Her voice was even. It was the same voice she used when she was explaining a medication schedule or asking a patient to rate their pain on a scale. Clear, measured, without unnecessary texture. "We need a room," the agent said. "Down the hall," she said. "Family consultation, 3rd door on the left." She did not look back at the nurse's station. She did not look toward room 311. She fell into step beside the 2 men, and they moved down the corridor together, and the floor watched them go. Darlene Pratt was standing near the supply alcove, holding a clipboard that she was not reading. She watched Renata walk past. Her expression was not shock exactly, not confusion exactly. It was the face of someone who had been adding numbers in their head for 2 months and had just been handed the total. Renata did not make eye contact. The consultation room was small and beige, with 4 chairs and a round table and a box of tissues on the windowsill that was always there, and never quite enough for what the room was asked to hold. The taller agent closed the door. His partner, shorter, with the alert stillness of someone who processed more than he said, stood near the window. Renata sat. The taller agent, whose name she would not be given and did not need, opened a folder and placed it on the table. He did not slide it across to her. He placed it and left it in the center, and she could read it from where she sat. "The operation closes tonight," he said. She had expected within the week. Tonight was tighter. "What changed?" she asked. "The visitor on Monday made contact outside the facility. We picked up the communication at 0400 this morning. They are moving the asset," he paused, "which means we move first." She looked at the folder. The information inside it confirmed what she had reported, extended by 2 months of work from other angles she had not been able to see from her position on the 3rd floor. It was a complete picture now. The patient in room 311, the connections outward from him, the role Dr. Philip Fielding had been playing, which was less active than she had initially assessed, and more structural, a facilitator rather than an actor. The visitor from Monday was the operational link. He had arrived to confirm a final piece of information before something was moved that should not be moved. That something was now being moved. "Tonight, what do you need from me?" she asked. The shorter agent spoke for the first time. He had a precise, economic way of talking, choosing exactly the words required and no others. He laid out what the next 8 hours needed to look like from her position, where she needed to be, what she needed to do, what she should not do under any circumstances. He spoke for 4 minutes, and she did not interrupt, and she did not write anything down, because she did not need to. When he finished, she nodded once. "One question," she said. The taller agent waited. "Fielding, is he in custody?" "As of this morning." She nodded again. There was a pause. The taller agent looked at her for a moment in the way that people occasionally looked at her when the 2 versions of her were visible at the same time, the one that had been sitting at the medication cart and the one now sitting at this table. It was a look she had received before. She did not respond to it. "We'll be in the building," he said. "You won't see us." "I know," she said. She stood. She straightened her scrubs. She picked up nothing because she had brought nothing with her. She opened the door of the consultation room and walked back into the corridor. The floor had not recovered from the earlier quiet. Things had resumed on the surface. Lena was on the phone. Juno had finished parking the wheelchair. Becca at the front desk was typing something with excessive focus. But the texture of the floor had changed. Something had happened and nobody could explain it, and so they were all in the process of deciding what shape to give it. Renata went back to the medication cart. She checked the time. 8 hours. She did the next medication round with the same efficiency and attention she had brought to every round for 2 months. She answered a call bell in 304 and helped the patient there, a man named Glenn who was recovering from cardiac monitoring and was bored and talkative. Find a documentary he had been trying to locate on his television for 3 days. She changed a dressing in 306. She completed her afternoon notes. She passed the door of room 311 4 times in the next 3 hours, twice on her normal route, once on a detour that had a legitimate reason attached to it, once because she wanted to listen. Gerald Mott's light was off. He appeared to be sleeping. She went back to her cart. At 2:15 in the afternoon, Darlene fell into step beside her at the far end of the corridor. They walked together for a few seconds, in the way that people walk together on a floor when they happen to be going in the same direction. "You want to tell me anything?" Darlene said. The question was quiet, not loaded, not demanding, just the question of a woman who had watched someone work in her space for 2 months and was now seeing a part of that person she had only suspected existed. Renata considered it honestly. "The call bell battery in 308 is getting weak," she said. "She pressed it twice this afternoon, and it only registered once." Darlene looked at her for a moment. "I'll have Juno replace it," she said. She peeled off toward the nurse's station. Renata kept walking. At 4:47 in the afternoon, something happened in room 311. She was not the one who managed it. She was at the nurse's station when it happened. She heard the sound from the corridor, a short, contained event with no ambiguity about its nature, and she kept her eyes on the chart in front of her and kept her pen moving and did not turn her head. Lena turned her head. Juno turned his head. 3 minutes later, Two people she had never seen before and would never see again came out of room 311 and walked to the elevator with someone between them who was not walking voluntarily. The walk was unhurried. The elevator doors opened. They got in. The doors closed. The floor was silent for 2 full seconds. Then Lena's phone rang and she answered it and the floor resumed. Renata finished the chart she was writing. She put the pen down. She looked at the fluorescent light above the nurse's station for 1 second, just one, the way you look at something that is over. Then she picked the pen back up and signed her name at the bottom of the page. The news arrived on the floor the way all news arrived, in pieces, through the mouths of people who knew only a part of it. Becca started it, which was inevitable. Becca had been at the desk when the 2 agents walked in and asked for a nurse by a name that was not a nurse's name, and that was more than enough foundation for the kind of story that builds itself in the telling. By Thursday morning, it had spread through 2 shifts and was still spreading. Nobody had the whole picture. Nobody could have. But the 3rd floor of St. Aurelius had what every hospital floor has, which is an enormous collective appetite for meaning, and so the pieces were arranged and rearranged with considerable energy. The patient in room 311 had been transferred on Wednesday evening, quietly, without the standard discharge paperwork, without the usual process of a patient gathering belongings and being wheeled to the exit. He was there, and then he was not there, and nobody on the floor could account for the gap between those 2 states. Dr. Philip Fielding did not come in on Thursday, or Friday. By Monday, his cases had been quietly redistributed, and his name had disappeared from the scheduling board, and nobody made an announcement about it, and nobody asked for one. Juno was the one who talked about the voice through the door. He had passed the consultation room on Wednesday afternoon, he said, on his way to the supply closet, and through the door he had heard Renata speaking, not the voice she used on the floor, not the quiet, patient, measured voice that explained medications and found television channels and changed dressings without making a person feel like a burden. A different voice, the same pitch, the same person, but arranged differently, precise, compact. The way you speak when every word is chosen for a specific function and decoration of any kind is a waste. She sounded like someone reading coordinates, he said. He said it in the break room to Lena, who told someone on the night shift, who told someone on the next morning shift, and so it traveled. Darlene said nothing publicly. This was also consistent with Darlene, who understood that her job was the floor, and the floor was people, and people were not well served by their head nurse, adding fuel to a fire. She went about her day with the same implacable efficiency she always had, but she watched the door of the consultation room on Wednesday for longer than she needed to, and she watched Renata come out of it and go back to the medication cart, and she held that image without putting it anywhere for the rest of the week. Renata came in on Thursday at 6:47. She clocked in. She found her locker. She poured a cup of the vending machine coffee, because she had forgotten her travel mug again, for the 2nd time, and she stood at the nurse's station holding the cardboard-flavored warmth of it, and read through the morning notes. She had slept 4 hours. She had sat in her apartment after her shift on Wednesday and eaten a meal she barely tasted, and sat at the kitchen table with the cold air coming in through the window she had left open, and she had felt the large, complicated weight of something that was over, which was different from relief, and different from satisfaction, but contained elements of both. She had been on this floor for 2 months and 3 days. She had done what she came to do. She was still here. The floor needed her, not in the way it had needed her 2 months ago, not as the operation she had been running, but in the immediate, unremarkable, essential way that a floor always needs its nurses. There were patients who needed checking. There were charts that needed updating. There were call bells that needed answering, and dressings that needed changing. And a man named Oliver in 309, who had, against all statistical likelihood, still not fully mastered the television remote. She went to work. She worked the Thursday shift, with the same attention she had brought to every shift. She did the medication rounds and answered the call bells and sat for a few minutes beside a newly admitted patient in 302, a young woman named Claire who was 27, and frightened in the specific way of people who had not yet learned what hospitals feel like from the inside. And Renata did not offer her the kind of reassurance that was technically true but emotionally hollow. She told her what to expect in simple, honest terms. She told her who to ask for anything she needed. She did not tell her it would all be fine, because that was not a promise the floor could make. Claire nodded and looked slightly less frightened, which was all Renata had tried for. She went back to the corridor. On Friday, she put in her notice. She found Darlene in the small office at the end of the ward, where Darlene went to complete administrative work between the hours of 2 and 4 in the afternoon, the door always partially open, the reading glasses always on her face instead of her head during these hours. Renata knocked on the frame. Darlene looked up. She set the form on the desk. Standard notice. 2 weeks. Filled out correctly. Initialed where required. Darlene looked at the form. She looked at it for a moment longer than was necessary to read it. 2 weeks, Darlene said. Yes. You giving a reason? There was a line on the form for that. Renata had written, personal circumstances. Darlene looked at that line. She set the form aside and looked at Renata instead. Are you all right? She asked. It was a direct question, and it was the right question, and it deserved a real answer. The problem was that the real answer was long and mostly not something Renata was able to give. Not because she did not want to, but because the parts of her life that had brought her to this floor and would carry her away from it were not hers to explain. I'm good, she said. I'm ready for something else. Darlene held her gaze for a long moment. She was not a woman who was easily managed or easily satisfied with partial answers. She had been reading people in high-pressure situations since before Renata was old enough to hold a medical chart. But she also understood, in the precise and human way she understood most things, that there were some doors a person keeps closed, for reasons that have nothing to do with dishonesty. She picked up the form. I'll process it, she said. Thank you, Darlene. Renata started to turn. Ren, Darlene said. She stopped. Whatever it is you actually do, Darlene looked back down at her paperwork. You're good at it. Renata did not answer. She went back to the corridor. The 2 weeks passed, the way time passes when you are paying attention to it. She worked them fully. She did not reduce her effort or her presence by a fraction. She trained the nurse who would take over her cart with the same care she would have given to anything worth doing. She documented her patient notes with extra detail, so that whoever picked them up would have a clear picture. She said goodbye to Oliver Crane on his discharge day. He shook her hand warmly and told her she had been one of the best nurses he had ever had, which was kind of him, and she thanked him, and he left with his wife and his finally understood television remote, and she watched the elevator close and went back to work. She said goodbye to Carol in 306, whose procedure had healed cleanly, and who had finally finished her novel. Carol pressed her hand and told her to take care of herself. Renata said she would. Eleanor had been moved to a palliative facility in the 2nd week of the notice period. Renata had heard about it from Lena. She had stood at the end of the corridor for a moment after hearing it, and looked at the window and then kept moving. On the last day, Becca asked her question. She found Renata near the elevator at the end of the shift, coat on, bag over her shoulder, badge already unclipped from her pocket. The shift had ended. The floor was transitioning to the evening team. Everything was in motion around them. Becca had clearly been composing the question for some time. It arrived slightly rushed, the way things do when you finally say them. What are you actually? Becca said. Like, what do you actually do? What actually are you? Renata looked at her. The elevator arrived. The doors opened. A nurse, she said. She stepped inside. The doors closed. She rode down to the lobby and walked through it, and pushed through the exterior door, and came out into the evening air, which was cool and smelled like rain that had not yet arrived. She walked to her car in the parking structure. She sat in it for a moment with the key in her hand. The operation had been closed for 13 days. The people who needed to know what it had produced were already working with what it had given them. The commendation, she had been told, was being processed. It would be sent to an address she had already left. She started the car. She drove out of the parking structure and into the city, and did not look back. Not because she felt nothing, but because looking back had never been useful to her, and she was a person who kept the things that mattered somewhere the rearview mirror could not reach. She had been a nurse. She had been a naval intelligence officer running a 2-month embedded operation in a regional hospital. She had held Eleanor's hand on a Thursday afternoon because there was nobody else. She had found the right documentary for Glenn in 304 and the right channel for Oliver Crane, and had made a frightened 27-year-old named Claire feel slightly less alone in a room she did not want to be in. She had done all of it in the same blue scrubs. She had done all of it on the same shift. Both things had been completely true. Both things would remain completely true regardless of whether anyone in that building ever understood what they had been watching. She drove through the city. The rain arrived. She turned on the wipers and kept driving. She had already been briefed on the next assignment. Different city, different building, different uniform. The paperwork was already in the system. She would start Monday.